Hey guys, welcome. In this video, we're going to talk about JavaScript objects and more specifically creating our own user-defined objects. Now, we've seen the ones that JavaScript offers to us. So if we go to W3 Schools and just go in Google and go to the home page and go to the JavaScript reference, we'll see a number of different objects that are provided to us, such as the document object, right? The document object has various properties and various methods, and essentially, you can use these properties and methods to build out your scripts. And so part of what our job is to do in terms of learning JavaScript is to really understand the various objects that are provided to us. And these are just pre-written code that are structured in something called an object. And we can begin to use those and as we see fit. So JavaScript objects, let's talk more about what is an object, right? And you'll hear this term object-oriented programming. Essentially, you'll hear the acronym OOPS or OOP, but really it's just a way of structuring our code to focus on real-world nouns, person, place, thing, or sometimes an idea. And so instead of actually approaching your script to achieve an objective, you're going to approach your script thinking about what are the nouns in my that are contained within my problem that I'm trying to code out, and begin to structure your code around either persons or place, thing, or an idea. And the same thing with the document object and the window object, right? We put the code inside of something called a document. We put the code in something called a window, but those are nouns. And so we structured our code in that such manner. Here's a good video I would like for you to take a look at that really kind of gives some understanding of objects and how they're created. So go ahead and pause this video and watch this video. So here's a few slides that we'll come back and revisit some of these things here. Let me just say a few things about how to structure out an object within JavaScript. And we'll use what we call an object literal in our example that we're going to walk through in just a few seconds here. But you have to declare a variable called person, and essentially it's going to hold an object. An object has attributes, and the attributes of this person has name, age, gender, interests, and then we also can have functions. And so we have one called bio and we have one called greeting. And essentially the functions or the methods, they take action against on behalf of the person. And so this function bio will essentially output some information, and the same thing with greeting, what is output some information for that particular person. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at this here. This is going to be quite messy here because a lot of this script that you see here, starting on line 78, was really just kind of doing things in a procedural manner and just getting things to work. But let's actually take a look at restructuring our code to focus on a person. In this case, we're going to focus around a student. And it's going to be a little awkward because this student is going to have a retirement age. And it's not the best example, but nonetheless, you'll get a good idea of how to begin to structure your code or your script around using object-oriented principles. So let's go ahead and take a look at this here. All right, so the first thing here is that I have a bunch of different data that's declared. Some is initialized, some is not initialized. We're going to take a look at that first, and then we're going to restructure it. But before we actually dive into the code here, let's actually talk about the objective. What are we trying to achieve here? What are we trying to do? All right, so let's go and open up our script in the browser. Open up our browser. So here's our script that we've been coding out. Right, this button here essentially shows the date, and then this one here is going to show some student data. Right, this student is Joe, age 55, and retirement years. Retirement left until years left until retirement is 10. What we're going to do is we're going to modify our script to say whenever the student clicks to show student data, what we're going to do is we're going to actually have the end user input the name and their age. So we're going to use a form to take in some data, and based on that data, it's going to be saved to an object. We're going to create an object instance, and we're going to output the information based on what the end user enters. So instead of just actually clicking this and showing the data, right, we're going to have the end user interact with our application and create an object in the back end. So looking back at our code here, let's go ahead and take a look at the data here first, right? Like a lot of this here from line 79 to 86 was more, or 87 was kind of just showing how to declare and initialize a variable. But let's now focus more on this user-defined object, right? So we already have a user-defined object called student. So let's flush this out and solidify this user-defined object. So the first thing I'm going to do here is a lot of things we already have. So we have age. I'm going to get rid of age, right? So that was this kind of more for demonstration here. We got the student, the name of student. So I'm going to get rid of that. Is found, institution. And the reason why I'm getting rid of it is because it's already defined here within the student. Again, this activity here or this video is really just how do we restructure our code around an object. In this case, it's going to be a student object. Like I said, bear with me. This is going to make it a little messy here, but nonetheless, we'll work through it, and hopefully you can kind of see my process and how I'm going to achieve the objective of getting the end user to input information, create an object instance, and then output some information back to the screen. We already have semester, so we're going to get rid of semester. And like I said, we only want to deal with this object student. Now we do have textbooks here, so what I'm going to do is just copy textbooks. And we can hold arrays within textbooks, within objects. So I'm going to create another attribute for student and say that these are the textbooks that this student will have. Last but not least here, this student is going to output some information or do some calculation as well. And so what I'm going to do here is that we have this function called get retirement, get years until retirement. That's going to belong to the student object. And so I want to create a function, because remember, objects can have attributes, which is everything that you see on lines 83 through 89, and then we can also have something called methods that that'll run on behalf of the object. All right, so let's go ahead and define that method for this student object here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just basically use what I have here on line 110, which is it's going to be a method that just calculates the retirement, how many years left until retirement. So let's go ahead and click here, and let's say get years left remaining. Keep it simple. And then here what we're going to do is something called an anonymous function, which we talked about in the previous video. And then I'm going to put some statements here. That's going to, the statements essentially that we have here. And at this point, I can go ahead and get rid of, and we'll return. Many years. Now, and then another function I'm going to have here is going to be a function that just essentially outputs information to the screen. And we already have that here, which is not this date, but this function here, which is an anonymous function. And so I'm going to call this one I'm going to call this function output, or this method output data. I'll do the same thing here, just do anonymous function. And we'll just go here. Now just observe how I'm just basically reorganizing my code, right? To basically to make sure to associate all of my functions and my attributes to be associated with this particular student object. And so so don't get confused in this part. I'm just essentially moving code around to adhere to object-oriented principles. And once I have this here, I can go ahead and delete this function, right? I can also go ahead and delete the statements within this function as well. Now let me jump back up to my object. There's a few things I need to correct here. Let me just minimize this here. So if you look at my two functions here, I have one called get years remaining. I declare retirement age, and then I have this var remaining years, and then I return remaining years when after the calculation of retirement age minus the current age. Now I want to basically get the age of the student that is going to be populated, so I'll say age, and what I'm going to do is use a keyword called this for this particular student, right? Because I'm going to use the age, I want to use this student's age, so I have to use this reserved keyword called this. And then remaining years will be returned back from this function. The same thing here. I'm going to look back at my other function is years left. This one calls something called gets years until retirement. Now we don't have this function left anymore. So what we're going to do is we're defining that function here within our student object, and we're going to create a new that says remaining years, and we'll just say we'll just keep it as such. And then what we're going to do here is say that the remaining years, that's actually just equal to 0 here first, because that's going to be a numeric value. And we'll say this, return this object's attribute of remaining years. And we can just go ahead and delete it here. So I just, instead of actually declaring it within this function, I just basically declared it as a variable or an attribute of the student object. And so it'll populate, once this calculation is done, it'll basically assign it to remaining years. And then so in our function here, when we go to output remaining years, we just go ahead and output this object's dot remaining years, and that will suffice. And then we also want to change this here to this dot age, and then here this dot name, and I think that does it. Okay. So both of our functions are defined. I think we basically our object is done. We have a number of different attributes between lines 83 and 89, and we have two methods. One is called get years remaining, and one is called output data. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to now trigger our code, right? We want to basically show the form that I've already created a form here. And I want to show the form. Currently, this form is actually set to display none, so you don't see it, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to create a statement. So when somebody clicks on the button, we want to show the form. And we already have on line 108, we already have a statement that is going to listen for the click. So when somebody actually clicks on that button, what we're going to do is we're going to generate the form. So let's do this here. We're going to write a statement that says document dot get element by ID. Which element do we want to get? It's going to be this element called entry form. Stay with me here. And what we want to do is say dot style, because we can use the style property, and then we can use any particular CSS property. We want to say display, and we want to turn display to block. So display the block, because right now it's currently set to display none. So let's just check to see if that works, and then we'll go in and begin to populate the information for our student. So let's save that, and let's actually go to the browser and render that, refresh our browser, and let's just see if that works here. Boom, there's our form, and we're ready to enter some data. We can say enter the student's name, we can say Bob, whatever name we want. We can give an age, let's say 34, and what we're going to do is now once the end user hit enter submit, we're going to show the data, the student's name, the age, and the years until retirement. So let's go and work on that portion of our application here. So let's jump back to our code and begin to structure out our object. Remember, this all happens in the midst of the click event. So our next statement is going to go right below our statement on line 109. All right, so we have this statement here that basically exposes our form. What we're going to do now is actually define another event that's going to listen to the entry of the submit button. So once we click on the submit button within our form here, let's go back to our form. So when somebody clicks on this here and they hit the submit button, we want to then get the values of these particular input elements. So let's write an event that will listen to the submit button here. So we're going to go back, and here I'll just do it below this one here. And I'm going to listen for the submit button here. which is going to be, let's go ahead and give that an ID. And let's call it enter or submit form. And down here, and for the submit form, we want to attach an event listener. The first argument is going to be click, and then we can do an anonymous function here. So what do I want to do? Once somebody clicks on that button, I want to get the two values that were entered inside of the element to the input elements. And so, so here, if we were to hard code value equals, and let's say Jonas, right? If we were just to hard code that and we were to save this and go back to our form and hit refresh and hit show data, you'll see that Jonas shows up. But what we want to do is we want to get the value of whatever somebody inputs in here. So we say Luke, and whatever they enter, we want to go ahead and get that value. And so instead of hard coding the value, the attribute, let's go ahead and get rid of that. And what we're going to do here is we're going to write a statement that's going to get the value. And so within our new defined our event attribute here, or our event listener, we're going to say document dot get element by ID. Which element do we want to get? In this case, we want to get the name, right? Because that's the ID of that input element. So we'll say name here, and we want to get the value. And this is the key: get the value. You can target any attribute within HTML by just basically giving it. So if you wanted to get the source of an image, right, you can do source. If you wanted to get the title, or let's say the alt attribute of an image, you can say alt. In this case, we want to get the value for that element. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign that to student, right? So we're going to begin to populate our student, the data for our student. We say student dot name equals that information that comes back from the input element. We're going to copy that. I'm going to change a few values here. And then we'll say student age. And here we're going to get the ID of that element, of this input element, and which is here, age. We want the value, right? Now that we so there's many attributes that we can begin to populate. We can say if it's found, or we can get the institution, we get the semester. At this juncture here, all we need is the name and age, and it's going to override what we already have coded here. And that's enough of what we need here to basically output the information to run our functions. So we have to get years remaining in the output data, and really all we need is the age and the name. We don't necessarily need the other attributes to be populated. So let's go down here, and now let's go ahead and run the functions that are a part of our student object. And so we'll say student dot, we're going to get years remaining, and then we're going to do the other function here, student dot output data, and that's it. And so let's go and save this and run it. I think there was a small error here. I had misspelled remaining years, so make sure that's correct. So that's correct now. I think that's good to go. So let's go and save this and run our code and see what we get here. So I'll right click and open this in, well, actually I'll go ahead and just refresh. So here, refresh, and let's click on show student data. We'll put in, let's put Jonas, age, let's put 44, and hit submit and see what we get. Boom, there it is. Everything is working according to plan, and this is output, and we have 21 years until retirement. Again, kind of a funny script, right? We're working with a student object and we're calculating the years to retirement. But hey, you get the point, and this is kind of get the example of how we can actually have functions or methods a part of our object. So let's jump back to our code here. Let's kind of quickly review that. So in this whole video, what I did was just restructure my logic, and I made it all a part of a student object. This is what we call a user-defined student object. Right, where the student has attributes and it has methods. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 attributes, and then we have 2 methods. And then here we just basically we put out all of our logic within this get years remaining, and we have a statement here that basically outputs that information. And we have some event handler attributes. Sorry, not some event handler attributes, but we have some add event listener methods that listens to the events on our HTML document. And then we're going to basically, whenever somebody interacts with our document, in this case here on line 111, whenever somebody clicks on the submit form, that submit button, it's going to get the values from the input boxes, and we're going to run the various methods associated with the student object. And that's really it. So hopefully you got a good sense of how someone would put together the student or the document object, right? We just kind of created our own object and began to use the various attributes and methods associated with that. So hey guys, that's going to wrap up this video in terms of how we can actually create our own user-defined objects. Like I said, it's really just a way of organizing our code to focus on real life nouns, person, place, things, or sometimes ideas. In the next few videos, which is going to be JS3, we're going to focus on how to structure out data in arrays. And then we're going to talk about flow control. So something called looping, selection, and sequence. And so we'll talk about those different ways in which we can actually use decision-making logic to build out a script. So stay tuned, and stay tuned for the next few videos here.